at the point you're about to put your question to the applicant agents.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got questions. One in regard to public realm, and I note the reference in NSP 51, the aspirations for the site in relation to provide new open space and also a new north-south green link from Melia Place to St Thomas Street. And I just make the observation around whether or not the applicant considered that it was their scheme that was in mind, or their location to deliver that, whether they felt as though the east-west link that they provide will adjoin to that, I suppose, along Fenning Street, and that would be the subject of another application. Yeah. But I just wanted to raise that sort of variation between the intent of the site allocation and the responses presented in relation to public realm from the framework document. And then I just wanted to ask the two agents in relation to the framework and the way in which you responded to the heritage assets that are in place.
Sorry, Councillor Rose. Forgive me, Councillor Rose. Can I suggest that there's a very long question, and I don't want to miss your question. So can I just ask you, just for clarity's sake, just to repeat the first question, then we deal with that, then we can move on to others. So
my first question. Yeah, my first question in relation to public realm is to ask, given that the NSP 51 cites a new north-south green link from Melia Place to St Thomas Street, how they feel that this application responds to that, given that they deliver an enhanced east-west link of hard landscaping.
Right here. All right. Who would respond to that? John? Is it John?
Yes, please. So maybe just two things. First of all, while we were asked to do a north-south link, we were also asked to do an east-west link. And that's why we made the entire ground floor permeable. So you can walk in from the south, go through to the north of our building. You can walk in from the east and go through the building. So it's entirely an open permeable building. And then we submitted last Friday a set of drawings of this area that gives you a look and feel and character of it. I wonder whether it would be possible to show them maybe just a couple of seconds each of the views. We went to some trouble to draw sketches from a number of different angles of the space so that members could begin to understand why we thought it was interesting, and also to bear in mind that we didn't see it as an empty space, but one that Neil and Benj were activating and making it very busy and exciting and a destination.
I believe that's in our members packet, is it not? Am I right?
Correct. We sent it on Friday. And Michael, I don't know at the right timing. It may be after some more questions, but
well, bring it up on screen. It'd be useful. People bring it up on screen. Just take care of this question. Sorry, Michael. Can you hear us?
I can share that now.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Michael, if you just go through, I mean, we can just go through it gently every couple of seconds, so just sort of talk very briefly to it. But the idea is to give you more of a visual impression of the spaces that we're creating.
Okay, and you might, as part of your commentary, respond to some of the objectors' observation in this regard, if you
certainly. And what Michael's getting it up with, say that the basements are tucked in to allow tree pits. There's only 2 trees that are not, the 3 trees that are over the basement. So we adjusted the shape of the building to that. I would like to talk about the wind, but that's perhaps suitable to be shortly after that. So the idea is that the inside and outside link is one very large public space open to everyone. The office lobby is actually on the first floor, so none of the character of the office use, or in fact a more exciting use that we alluded to earlier, need to dominate the base of the building. And we made a very wide space for the pub, and we've seen the pub regularly. They have really interesting plans to make their pub open onto this new route across, and to sort of improve and enhance their building. So they were very interested in what we're doing, and in fact we did it partially for them. So the sketches show you, I think, a really nice juxtaposition, which is something that London really excels in doing, where that we've preserved pubs and the conservation area, and then just in between those and an international train station, there's a change in scale. I would point out that we've vastly decreased that from the beginning. The site allocation says the western end of this site, which is exactly where we are, the tower should not detract from the primacy of the shard. So that's not suggesting that this development is small, and in fact we've hugely reduced it from what we thought that that wording meant to something that's much more measured, which again we hope to show you in the drawings. So we really have tuned, reduced, honed, pushed and pulled. The pavilion, for instance, was really part of discussion. And just to point out, the pavilion has been redesigned since the design review panel remarks that the objectors mentioned. We entirely redesigned it. The design review panel were correct. It was stepped up and asymmetric, and we made it into a more compact and symmetrical thing. It's a little bit like a music pavilion of previous eras. So maybe just touching on the wind, it's just worth saying that the shard was done to completely different design criteria than apply today, which is far more stringent. So there's no comparison. The shape of the building with that prow that you see from the east fundamentally means that the wind is reduced. And in fact, this wind is not produced because of the height of the building. Even if it's a third of the height, there would be some wind issues. The fact is there's nothing there at the moment at all. We had over 17 wind tunnel tests, and we include mitigation on our site, but not for the adjacent sites. So what you were shown was not Vinegar Yard on its own. Vinegar Yard on its own, the wind is either sitting or standing, comfort everywhere. And what you were shown is an accumulation of what happens if there's also cellar and actually the previous Beckett House scheme, but with none of their mitigations in place. We now know that Edge have put in a different scheme with mitigation.
Forgive me, John. Can I ask you, tell us about mitigation, just so we understand what mitigations have you put in place, just so we're clear.
Yeah. So our scheme on its own passes with flying colours. It has comfort all the way around the building. You can imagine people spilling out onto the side. It has comfort around there. There's one tiny dot on the northeast corner, and that is where we do put trees, but it's not a very big excess. The slide you were shown assumes that both Beckett House has been built, but in the configuration of the previous scheme, and that the cellar scheme has been built, but it doesn't include any of the mitigation measures we know they're going to put in place. So, for instance, with the cellar scheme, if you look at the Arapwind report, and that's because we didn't know exactly what they were doing, and it can only get better than the.
I'm really sorry, John. Sorry.
Yep.
Can I just you just talk about your scheme?
Yep.
My question is, what mitigation steps have you taken? The term soft landscape doesn't mean anything to me. Can you just be quite specific? What mitigations have you taken to reduce the wind shear effect as a result of these buildings?
Sure, and just on its own, as I explained to you, there's very little mitigation needed. So the trees are helpful, but they're not changing it from enormously bad to good. Their trees are helpful. In the gap that we've created in the east-west route, there are some screens to mitigate the wind that would just go through. There's a short passageway between the Fenning Street and the rest of our east-west route, and we have. I mean, the trees that are around there, as I said, because the wind conditions were already very benign, they don't need to do very much. In the accumulated scenario, the mitigation of the areas that you saw, the little red thing on snowfields, for instance, is dealt with on Cellar's site, but it only occurs if the Cellar building is there. And the increased wind on Mellor Street is mitigated by the Edge building and only occurs if the Edge building is there. So without those buildings, there are not those difficult wind conditions, and with them, they come with their mitigation measures. So in either case, what you saw was a test without the mitigation of the neighbours, but assuming that they were there.
Right.
We do have a window that was again, not yet clear enough.
Forgive me, again, you're making my interesting point for me, I think, and maybe we didn't pick this up on an earlier briefing, I must say, because it's a cumulative effect, which is what the objective has highlighted. And I'm now very conscious that these are outstanding points that I need to return to the officers about. I won't pursue you on this question, and thank you for your response in regard. Can I, where is she, Catherine Rose? I can't actually see you in this wonderful software we use. Yeah, there you are. I can hear you now. Do you want to follow up further? You had an outstanding question. Continue.
Yeah, no, so my second question was that this site has three heritage assets: the Fenning Street warehouse, which is not the same degree as the vinegar warehouse there, and the Horseshoe pub. And it would seem that one of those heritage assets is lost, the other one is enveloped by the building that sits in front of it, and then the warehouse, although not on your land and not your part of your application, has a juxtaposition of a pavilion building that is seeking to echo it, and further to that, when you worked together in the framework and you worked with the other site owners, and you looked at the accumulated points of interest, open spaces and heritage assets, did it ever occur that the warehouse itself, Vinegar Yard Warehouse, might serve the same purpose as the pavilion that you're building, in the sense of it would be an authentic warehouse of the same scale and could provide the entrance and exit to a music venue and could provide the same quantum of retail and restaurant use in that building as part of the framework discussions that you had?
All right, thank you, Councillor. It's a long question, I must say, but... Well,
I mean, maybe a short answer. So there's a street between our site and Sellers' site. So the music venue or the performance venue is in the basement to minimise its disruption, etc., to noise, etc. And so there are sewers and all sorts in the street, and it's actually not in our ownership either. So we don't own it, and it's not connected to our building. I don't know whether you want to add anything further.
I would add, I mean, we covered several points there. One is regarding the pub as a heritage asset.
Forgive me, Ewan. I know the clerk will pick up on this one. Can I ask you please to introduce yourself, just for the record here?
Sorry, Ewan Puffett from CIT.
Very good. Continue.
Thank you, Chair. We've discussed the matter regarding the warehouse on the corner and the heritage aspects of that. In respect of the Horseshoe pub, yes, we understand that it is a beautiful building, and to reflect that, we have pulled our building back away to expose more of the facade of that pub from Mellier Street. In addition, we, in talking to the pub's owner, reviewed our position of a building in proximity to it and pulled it back to give them space. So they've looked at how they can activate their north boundary to really celebrate that asset and actually bring it forward from the pub it was into something that's actually more economically viable for them. So we've listened to them, and I think the other part for me is that the location of our square is firmly set that celebrates the old Vinegar Yard Warehouse that is the ownership of Cellar, and allows that to be seen from St Thomas Street, to be explored, and whatever happens with that, we allow that to breathe and develop and be celebrated.
Chair, could our colleague Annabelle Fernandez also add to that one point? She did the framework consultation.
In fact, to be clear, Annabelle, could you introduce yourself and the organisation that you represent, please? Go ahead. Because you're mute at the moment. You're on mute.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. My name is Annabelle Fernandez. I work for KPF Architects, and I'm an architect, and I was appointed by all 4 landowners to create the framework piece led by CIT. So just following up on what Ewan was saying, the heritage assets were absolutely key part of the framework. We wanted this entire development to speak to the area where we are, and starting from the arches of London Bridge Station to the key setting of the pub, the Vinegar Yard Warehouse, indeed, and also the Our Lady La Salette church by Mellier Street, where assets that for which we wanted to enhance the urban setting. So altogether, we wanted them to sort of shine and take a very starring presence in all the public spaces we were creating.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I think if I may, Councillor Rose, I'll move on to Councillor Morris now. Is that okay? Councillor Morris, go ahead.
Yes, so I have nothing further to add.
Thank you. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions, but they should be quick questions and quick answers.
Very good. Very good. Thank you.
John, I think in your opening comments, you talked about the development being relevant for local people. And just in the context of that, you also talked about the pub, this new open space for the pub, the possibility of them expanding and utilising a new open space. Are you aware that there have been issues with the local community around noise from the pub and from the outdoor use of the pub already? So I just wondered how you had taken into consideration anything like that, any views from local people in relation to that when incorporating effectively the pub into your scheme.
Sure. Effectively, with the pub, they have developed a new spill out space, which is to the north of the pub. So they would no longer need to spill out towards the residents on Mellor Street. Okay,
thank you.
And we do have a sketch that shows that. I don't know, Michael, if you're able to at some point show them, but we've drawn this in several views.
Okay, thank you. My next question is, so we've heard a lot obviously about the greening of the public realm and the microclimate, the wind climate, etc. And I know one of the objectors said that she didn't think there was anything that could mitigate it. However, I just wanted to ask you, if we were minded to approve the application in its current form this evening, would you be willing to consider a condition on your 106 if the officers approved it, etc., to review once the building's finished, and that may actually be when all of the buildings are finished, depending on how it works out, to come back and just assess whether or not there has been an adverse impact on the microclimate, the wind conditions, and whether or not there is any further greening that you could do. Would you be willing to accept a condition to just review the situation and put in any potential mitigation?
So I'll take that question, John. Sorry, Ewan again from CIT. Councillor Morris, yes, we would be willing to take that position if needs be. We are confident in our proposals that we don't cause the issues, but if it gives a degree of comfort, we would consider a suitably worded condition.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Hold on a second, Councillor Morris. It's difficult to make sure the clerk has captured that response. Ensure the clerk has captured that response.
Yes, I have, Chair.
Very good. Go ahead, Councillor Morris.
Sorry, Chair. Thank you. And then just finally, if you could just remind us how long it will be, obviously, if you got the permission tonight, and then obviously there's time to sign 106s, etc., etc. When do you think realistically the development will be finished?
Okay, I will take that one again. Thank you. We would anticipate a 3-year build programme. However, we are working with, and we've already spoken to 2 large contractors around innovation that they would have in order to try and mitigate time on site by off-site modular construction. And we are putting that into an evaluation of a contractor we'd go forward with, because we want to try and do a lot of this away from site and therefore speed up on-site activity to minimise any disruption that we cause to local parties. In addition to that, we've also spent considerable time talking to the other adjoining owners about how we have a joined up delivery programme so we don't foul each other up. And Councillor Morris, you will perhaps remember me from South Bank Tower days, where we worked hard with first of all Sea Containers House and then with One Blackfriars to work constantly, being held to account by your good self and residents in order to take on board our plans and modify those plans to suit. And I would anticipate doing exactly the same in this location.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you, Councillor Morris, for your succinct questions and indeed succinct responses from the applicant. Can I now take Councillor Mark Newens? Marky?
Hello, thank you very much, Chair. In actual fact, it sort of a lot of the issues that I wanted to, questions I wanted to ask, some of the questions I wanted to ask have largely been touched upon. But
so can I move on then?
So I wanted to, Martin, you haven't let me ask anything.
Oh, please go ahead.
So you know,
it's okay. Go ahead, please.
I wanted to ask. During the presentation made by the objectors, there was the discussion about the poor quality green space that was, or the poor greenness of the space that was due to be provided around the site. Okay. And they alluded specifically to the fact that because there's a basement, you can't actually even put any proper quality trees in, etc., etc. I wanted to ask if you have paid any attention at all to the wider London concept of the urban greening factor, and if so, I mean, if not, I'm sure it's not something that you're not familiar with. But if you were to look at this through the lens of an urban greening factor, I'm kind of suspecting it would come up really, really poorly.
Sorry, can I have your question, please, Margie? If I could have your question now.
And how could you therefore improve the quality of the green space, given the restrictions, obviously, that are inherent in providing such a large basement?
Okay, can I take that as the question first of all?
You can ask
a follow-up question. Yeah, go ahead.
Factually, the basement is smaller than the site, so it's factually incorrect to say that there aren't trees because of that. We have many terraces. I actually did my dissertation on roof gardens. We love them. The biodiversity and greening and wellness agenda is not just at the ground floor. But the other part of this, perhaps it's worth getting Neil in to talk about actually the vision for the ground floor. Clearly, if it's too dominated by planting, it doesn't become a public square, and we wanted to find the right balance between that. Maybe it's appropriate at your discretion, Chair.
Yes, I'm happy to take as wide a response as possible to help members to make the final determination. So I'm happy for your colleagues to contribute. Sure.
So Neil, would you like to? Yeah.
Forgive me, Neil, can I ask you just to introduce yourself and confirm where you're from, just for the record here, please?
I'm Neil Benson, and I'm from Vinegar Yard.
Very good. Very good. So, please respond.
I mean, what we're trying to do is to repeat what we've had as a meanwhile use on the space. I mean, we're obviously outside, but this inside-outside space is being created. We want to expand out into that open square. We have the benefit of having an inside space so we can work out throughout through the year. We'll obviously be using a range of food, drink, and also retail. We already have a market on site. We've been involved from day one in this process and are looking forward to moving forward and repeating what we've done, which I think has been well received.
Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you for your response, Neil. So, Councillor Margaret, do you have a further question? And it could be a succinct question.
I wanted to touch on the well, actually, quick straight question, and it may be in the report and that I've missed it, but I wondered how many people you would expect to be occupying, working in this building. I'm interested in that in terms of sort of the public space that is going to be available around it, given that it's already a very crowded area.
Okay, let's take, if I may then, Margie, let's take that question. Let's take that question first of all. It doesn't answer that question.
So it's divided into two parts, and maybe we could first of all ask William whether he could just talk to who will be used. William Austin from Southwark Studios, that's the base of the building, and then Ewan can answer the second part if that is again okay.
Okay, William, and just for the record, can I ask you to introduce yourself, where you're from, just for the record here, please. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is William Austin. I am the founder and managing director of Southwark Studios, a local benefit for the community society. I'll give a very brief overview for 3 minutes that I hope will preempt any questions and answer the ones that you've asked already.
Very brief overview, very brief, please.
Of course. Southwark Studios are a Southwark Council vetted and approved workspace operator. We've been providing affordable creative space for Southwark residents since 2009. I want to stress that Southwark Studios don't work for CIT. We're not on the payroll of the developments team. We are an independent charity organisation. We're here today because we saw an opportunity to partner, to make a deal to manage space and deliver truly affordable workspace. In general, the terms that we've managed to agree with CIT are on approximately 13,000 square foot of the low ground floor on a 30-year term on a rent of £12 a square foot, a very important capital service charge of £1.20 a square foot, and the cost of fitting out the space to an operational artist studio complex is also being covered by CIT, and it's those combinations of terms that we've agreed prior to submission to committee that enable us to manage this workspace at an all-inclusive price to the local artists and small creative businesses, and it will meet the Greater London Authority's definition of affordable. It goes well beyond what Southwark's own emerging policy is in an affordable workspace and allows us to deliver something that we consider truly affordable. We're aiming for about £19 a square foot to the end user, a huge reduction, as I'm sure you're aware, to the market rate of this area, and that's the reason I'm here tonight. This deal is incredibly important for the affordable artist studio sector, and we continue, both as Southwark Studios and Southwark Council, our history together of pioneering this type of new solution of using redevelopment to in this way to secure this truly affordable workspace for our borough. So this will give us a new home. It plays a role in making this building more than a commercial development, I feel, by addressing, I think, the societal changes that we see coming, providing physical space for culture and collaboration and creativity. Unfortunately, recently, the type of space that we're providing has been severely reduced, as local artist studio providers like myself have struggled to compete with ever-increasing property values in Southwark. Southwark has lost 70% of its artist studios since 2014. Demand, conversely, is huge. Southwark Studios, we've got 500 local residents on our waiting list for this type of space. Many of them have submitted support comments for this application because they see, just like us, a great opportunity to address their needs and deliver this type of workspace. The affordable element of the site that we're going to be managing will become the largest new art studio complex in central London. So the positive impact we see on the social regeneration, although it's difficult to measure and quantify the benefits of art and artists, we just see this being very key to the local engagement in the area.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That's pretty clear. That's very clear. Mark, I'm going to give you the opportunity to ask your last question, if I may.
Sorry, I think maybe I was perhaps slightly misunderstood, but I was interested in the so thank you for that information. That's fantastic. But I was interested actually in the numbers of people who are likely to be working on the site at any, given the obviously there's a
you mean during construction
very high density of accommodation. I'm interested in the numbers of people who are likely to be occupying that space on a daily basis.
Okay, but if we take that, go to you and Profit, I imagine. Yes.
Thank you for the question. We're looking at a number of about 2,000 people. We have Richard Tyree of Good People, who I'd invite you to invite to comment, if appropriate, Chair, because he can talk about how we've come up with an innovative way to get those jobs forward into the community, a scalable and adaptable way, and one that actually gives jobs for local people. So if appropriate, could you ask
I think we're fine. It's most certainly detailed in the report, and I'll direct Councillor Ewan to the report in that regard. Councillor Ewan, I'm going to assume there are no further questions. Would that be right?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there further questions from the committee? If not, I might just ask a few questions of you, Ewan and John, to just be clear. We've heard from the representative community, or the objectives on this, unfortunately, on this occasion. The presentation was quite detailed, and there are a number of points made by them. But prior to my detailing some of their observations, do you have any response to what was said by the objectors? And I note that they are formed as part of the neighbourhood forum policy, which gives them some weight here in terms of reviewing planning applications and expressing views. And I'm somewhat concerned that you haven't been able to get them on board. Okay, maybe you might give us some idea of the contact you've had with the neighbourhood forum, personalities involved, and are you able to point to mitigation changes, amendments that may have been made to this application as a result of interaction with the local community who they represent? Ewan or John, I don't mind whoever responds first of all. So that's my broad question. Contact with the neighbourhood forum, and why is it that you've not been able to get them on board?
Maybe we could also ask the person who arranged all of the neighbourhood forum meetings, but just initially to say one thing that springs to mind is that they were mainly talking tonight about the accumulation of lots of different schemes, whereas we're here tonight talking about a very modest scheme that actually has been here the longest. And we would be very grateful if you considered it as on our own merits, because clearly there are some aspects of other schemes which may or may not need different scrutiny. So a lot of the comments, we believe, were based around that issue. We do have a set of slides that we sent, and I believe is in your members pack, and if you are able to look at that, or if you're able to ask Michael to show you, we believe that they would be most reassured by the views that we're showing of the public spaces and the scale and the warehouse as it is at the moment, etc. The next thing to say is actually the Southwark planning officers were very aware of the community feelings. And the very first meeting we had with them said, you need to make sure this is relevant to this wider area. And they were great advocates in making sure the scheme changed and changed and changed until they were satisfied, which I would say has got more out of this developer than you would see in pretty much any other office building in central London. All of this public aspect to the base of the building, that you've met the people who are going to animate and use it. So I think it's an extraordinarily detailed and specific offer. So we had a hugely different scheme. It's changed in every way, a lot of it through the officers. I think then that the engagement with the wider group made us think, for instance, about making sure that the specific proposals were very attuned to what was useful and relevant, and you've got a sense of that from some of our partners. We changed the different offers, all sorts of things. So that's my preface. Ewan or maybe Ralph maybe want to add a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
I would add that some of it has been down to interpretation. We've heard objections regarding the wind, which I think we've advised now is actually a misunderstanding of the information presented, and our scheme on its own is fine. There was objections to the public realm being inadequate. Mm-hmm. Circa 42% of our site area is actually open space, mm-hmm. and that space has a function about how it's going to be used, so it doesn't become a wasteland as referred. It's going to be a curated and activated space which links the inside to the outside, the pavilion building to the ground floor, open ground floor of our building, and also links through to the pub to celebrate that. The consultant process, we had probably in the order of about 30 contact points across the framework and our scheme. So I think we've gone through different points, and we've listened, as John has said. We've talked about public benefits, £12 a square foot for 30 years for local artists is significant. We're looking at 250 local jobs being created, which I believe is a significant contribution. The scheme is designed to be highly permeable. It's not a building that people have to walk around. It is highly inclusive. We're putting in things like water points inside to encourage people to come in. It doesn't have to be something that you don't feel you want to go in. We've got the community space at the base of the atria, so people can come in and we'll use that. And William Austin has already talked about how that will be made available for community space. So there's, without going on for too long, there's a number of benefits which come in to this. So I think it's a point of perspective for those that see it as being too much, and those that actually can see some benefits going forward. We totally understand there will be some impacts. We've listened to those impacts, mitigated where possible, and we've understood where there are impacts and tried to explain why we believe those impacts are acceptable in the balance of this development. We have been mindful of not only OBNF, but other people that have come through to the multiple presentations and open days that we've held. So I believe you're on mute, councillors. Sorry, Chair.
Oh, thank you. That's okay. Thank you. And thank you for your comprehensive response. That's great. What level of contact have you had with the neighbourhood forum? What is the level of contact? I'm trying to understand how the scheme has responded to the questions raised by the neighbourhood forum. So it is quite detailed, and you would have seen their detailed response, which is very comprehensive. And it's unusual for two groups of professionals, and if I may refer you as such, to be so widely apart. I'm trying to understand why that has happened. Any reasons why? Were you actually talking to them directly, or was it always via officers, maybe? Is that why we have this disconnect?
We've had significant FaceTime with various members of OBNF through our framework and through our individual presentations. We also attended an invitation from OBNF in Globe House adjacent to the site for an evening where we had a open discussion that was actually chaired by Councillor Situ at the time. So I think we've probably gone further than one would normally expect to do so.
Thank you very much. That's fine. That's what I wanted to hear, if such a meeting had been organised. And I say to all objectors, supporting others, you can get some of what you want, but you can't expect to get all what you want. But thank you both for your very comprehensive answers. Can I just double check that there are no members of the committee that wish to ask further questions? As distinct questions not been asked previously. If not, I want to thank you for your presentation. Thank you very much. If I now move on, I would like to move on now along the agenda and just to ensure, is there a supporter in online? Can I just double check with Gerald? Is there a supporter who lives within 100 metres of the development site? Michael Wurzel, I believe.
Yes, Chair, he's registered to speak. I'm not entirely sure whether he's in the meeting.
Michael Wurzel?
Can you hear me?
Oh, is that Michael Wurzel? Oh, I can.
Correct.
Is that Michael Wurzel? Thank you.
Good evening.
Can I, before we begin, just want to get things set up, can I ask you just to confirm your name, and we don't need your exact address, just maybe the street that you live on, just so we're clear that you live within 100 metres of the development site.
Good evening. My name is Michael, and I live on Melia Place. I think that's probably precise enough.
I think that is more than sufficient, Michael. Just to emphasise that I'm going to give you 3 minutes to make your presentation. At 30 seconds, I'll indicate 30 seconds remaining. Okay, but I would encourage you to direct the committee on questions you'd like us to follow up following your presentation. Alrighty, so I will start the clock now. You may start now.
Very good. Thank you very much. So, as a resident. And we had, if you remember, we had a successful determination last year on our side. We, in principle, encourage the overall St. Thomas Street development. We are for the energy that brings it. We are for the workplaces. We are for the considerations on the ground floor. We are for the development of the area, particularly it is very close to a very large infrastructure project, which is London Bridge, and we think it makes sense. So we are in principle in support. We are also in support for this particular development, and we would say it is large in scale and in height, but we are in principle support of the considerations. Now, Chair, you said, what do we want to get out of it? There's one thing, very clearly what we want to get out of it, and I spoke to Ewan Puffin about it again last week, is we are residents, so we are right on the fault line, if you like, between the office development and us, and we think mixed use is the future and is a good thing to do. The difference is, during the day that all makes sense, the difference is during the night, the majority of those inhabiting the office buildings will be gone and we will stay here. So our main concern is light pollution. It's very real. You know, residences and streets have a certain character, and we talked about it. And we think, you know, particular as it relates, we are faced with, you know, the bathrooms, the toilets, and we are faced with the elevator core, with the lifts. So that means there is light associated with the lift lobbies, and there's light associated with bathrooms at night. There's emergency light. We had a good conversation, but I want to reiterate sort of that is our main, you know, this is our main concern, is light pollution, to make sure we're not only relying on building management and smart technology, but actually, certainly for the first 5-6 floors, for the residences to the south, there are measures in place that guarantee that we have, you know, not a cold white nightlight on facing our bedrooms. Thank you very much.
30 seconds. Oh, very good. Thank you for your well-timed presentation. Are there committee members who would like to ask a question of the supporter? And I can't see anything right now. Hold on a moment, my technology. Oh, Councillor Whittam. Is your digital hand up or not?
My hand is raised.
Very good. Go ahead.
Michael, thank you very much for your presentation. Can I just ask who the we are? You kept saying we. Is that you and your partner, or is there a group of people?
Yeah. My wife with the art gallery, which has a temporary art gallery, and remember, we're going to develop that with the art gallery on the ground floor. So we have an interest in the wider interest with the art community too. And the studios, we support the studios, the artist studios that will be part of the scheme. But when we say we, it's the art gallery at the ground floor and the residences and our apartment on top.
Very good.
So that's we,
my
wife and I.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor O'Brien. You're mute. You are on mute.
I am. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
You asked the developers about the light spillage. What response did you get from them?
So it would be good maybe if you and Puffin, you're on the line, right? We had, you know, I was given reference and assurance specifically to the report, and there's a report on light pollution, which is part, of course, it's part of sustainability. Nobody wants to have lights on and this and that. And it is, my understanding, it is tied into the building management system, right? And there is light detection, and the bathroom light shouldn't be on if nobody's using the bathroom, right? So while these are all considered, I would suggest that, you know, as we see this through, that, you know, well, we see these things through, but I would also suggest, particularly for the first 5 floors, where us as residences and, you know, we face the bedrooms facing the building. So we can make sure, and that would be maybe a question to the architect, would they consider other measures like, you know, having opaque glass as opposed to transparent glass for the first 5 floors to the south?
Right, yeah, and they responded positively to that, of course.
Ewan Puffin responded positively and suggested we will certainly follow up and see that through. Correct.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Bryan, I will move on now then.
Yes, sure.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm going to thank the presenter for his presentation. Thank you very much. I'm now going to move on to ward councillors, and just want to make sure that we've got Councillor Ali and Hungo. Oh yes, indeed. Oh, it's just yourself, Councillor Ali, or
just myself this evening?
We are happy to have you. Okay. Can I invite you, please, just for the record, just to introduce yourself, please? Then I'll give you permission to start. Go ahead.
I'm Councillor Hamera Ali for London Bridge and West Bermondsey Ward.
Very good. Thank you very much. You may begin your presentation now.
Snowsfields and Bermondsey Street Village has a mixed demographic population and one with a unique character. Having pored over nearly 1,000 documents, met developers, spoken with the OBNF, hundreds of residents, local businesses over the last 18 months, I must draw the committee's attention to the following 3 areas. Massing having an impact, especially with light, so that's both the officers have directed you slightly incorrectly, where they've talked about, for example, on the Snowsfields estate, 24 out of 24 windows are impacted. They are not all bedrooms. There is a mixture of living rooms and home office space. Similarly for 36 Snowsfields, 65 of 141 windows and Raquel Court. The second point is around height, mass, noise impact to the conservation area, notwithstanding the fact that 20 stories is now going to be built inside the conservation area. Snowsfields and Bermondsey Street Village have very unique characteristics, not just in the fabric of the buildings, but in the nature of the close-knit community and the very villagey feel. But bringing a City of London type shiny building into the direct context of the conservation area means that the feel will change irreparably. Buildings are looming and can really be seen over the south facing projections and will dwarf assets, as has been said around the Horseshoe Pub. And then thirdly, the green agenda and public realm. It's just really poor. No residents support hard landscaping. The Southwark plan talks about the lack of green spaces in the north of the borough. The London Plan Policy 510 talks about CAZs needing to increase green space. This really doesn't cut the mustard. We are losing the opportunity to provide publicly accessible lush green oasis type space that is needed. And Southwark merged its planning departments with public health to ensure that public health benefits are realised in the development. With COVID in particular, people are increasingly working at home and are already small homes. There is a desperate need for green space. Leather Market Gardens particularly will be overrun at busy times, and we're really seeing a loss of amenity. Ward councillors, I'm afraid, are opposed to this development. If the committee were minded to approve this development, and I don't really think they should, then I must draw their attention to 3 other points. On site servicing, construction management, social regeneration charter, loss of amenity in section 106. And I'm happy to take more questions on those if I run out of time. On site servicing, whilst I welcome the concept of a joint servicing plan, it's very vague. Without the plan, hundreds of people will be coming and going every day. But the consolidation description is very vague. It could be 15% less than that, 50%. And currently in places like Millier Street, there's hardly any traffic at all. So we're now going to increase noise and pollution in the area. Remember, electric vehicles still produce particulate.
Your time is up. Your time is up, Councillor. Thank you very much for your presentation. I see a digital hand. Councillor O'Brien, is your hand up? Councillor O'Brien? You on mute? You are on mute. There you go.
Sorry, I forgot I turned it off. Was there anything you wanted to add to that, just in terms especially of increased traffic, of deliveries around that area, because we know it's a very tight streetscape around there?
Yeah, so I think you'd already referencing the sort of the strikes on buildings, but I think it's really important to note that we've got residences right on top of the developments at 36 Snowsfields, at 820 Snowsfields, which is a small estate. And the fact is that there is hardly any traffic around there today. We are now actively choosing to really multiply up the amount of people coming through the area. And let me just be clear, that when traffic, regardless of diesel, petrol, electric, is coming into the area, it's not just the movement of that vehicle coming through the area, it's stopping. It's people getting out of the cars, talking loudly, noise and the clatter of whatever is being moved from place to place. If you then multiply that up by the many tens of vehicles that will be coming through the area, I'm not really convinced that the locations or the points for servicing are really the right area. They need to be as far away from a residential, the residential areas of Melia Street. I just don't think that's acceptable.
Thank you for your question. Can I move on to Councillor Delmois? Yeah, yep, go ahead. You're up. No, we can't hear you yet. You're still on mute. There you go. There you are.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Ali, you suggested that you had a couple of other things that were we minded to approve, and you did make it clear that you didn't want us to approve it, but were we minded to approve it, you had a couple of other things apart from servicing that you wanted to make the point about, but you seem to run out of time.
Yes, thank you. So on construction management.
Oh,
sorry,
Robin, please. Feedback. Yeah, feedback. If you all could mute yourself. Yep, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, on construction management, it's a long-term construction site. And we heard earlier from objectors that for the primary school children attending Snowsfields Primary School, there's going to be a whole era of children who have only seen development in the area with all the dust and the pollution and the constant noise and the impact. And regardless of whether it's just-in-time delivery for construction vehicles, actually it still needs to be planned. So whether it's just before it's needed or in advance of it being needed, there is just nothing around how this site works on its own, let alone how it works with the other three applicants. There's something around limiting the hours of construction, and there's got to be an immensely strict plan for vehicle movement to the earlier point that I raised. On the points around social regeneration charter loss of amenity in section 106, the New Southwark plan talks about a need for community space. There isn't any presented on this scheme. Only one of the 8 promises in our social regeneration charter is met with the scheme, and there are many people who stand to lose out here. And additionally, the New Southwark plan describes St Thomas Street as a high street, and yet there's nothing to indicate the amenities that a community would ordinarily get from a high street. I certainly think that in terms of supporting the local community, there is a requirement for activities and funding for schools and youth groups. Leather Market Gardens in itself, as I said before, is going to become quite a hot spot. The local community facilities there really would need to be upgraded, and the garden itself would need to be reshaped in order to facilitate that increase in traffic. In terms of class usage of shops, restaurants and bars, whilst residents would welcome A1 and A2, A3 would need a cap, and whilst there is a cap on A4 and A5, we think there should be no more A4 and A5 in that area. There are already many on Bermondsey Street, Tooley Street, Borough High Street. We're already saturated. And when we talk about the #1 issue in the area being noise and antisocial behaviour, we are just inviting more trouble late at night. And last but not least, those residents in 8 to 20 Snowsfields in particular are now going to have a looming building which has a massive impact on their lives. I would love to invite residents who live in there to be able to say a few words, but actually they really need something around noise and environmental and green barriers to protect their site from the barrage of noise. You know, there's so much more to be talked about here, but I really don't see that the developers are providing any sort of amenity. I've got specific suggestions on those. I don't know if they have to be listed out today, but that's sort of the broad brush in that area.
Not a problem, and it would be useful if we were clear what your suggestions may have been, and if you'd supplied it to us in advance, it'd be even better still, save time. It is a challenge if you. It's an open-ended statement now. If you wish us to take it into consideration, it's useful for us to have it in advance, which is why ward members are invited to all of our meetings, briefings of the committee. You may want to highlight maybe one or two that you'd like us to give particular.
Well, Chair, I want to be clear that none of this actually compensates itself for the development in its space. But if the committee is minded to approve, then there certainly needs to be a reshape and rebuild of Bermondsey Village Hall, which has got to be in the gift of residents to decide how that happens, and a reshape of Leather Market Gardens, including a move of the football pitch. I think.
Hold on a second. So I'm referencing this application.
Yeah.
I think you're actually discussing a separate matter. That is.
Really?
Yeah, well, I think
they're not providing green space or amenity space, Chair, and so the green space that will end up being used is the one that's already being used. And actually, now that we're bringing hundreds, if not thousands, more workers into the area, when they want to have breaks, lunch times, and if they're hanging around in the evening, they're going to end up in Leather Market Gardens. So actually,
forgive me, Councillor. I understand that. What I'm wondering is, have you put this to the applicant, these ideas to the applicant previously?
I have had some conversations with applicants. I have not heard back from some applicants on things like this. Equally, the school itself is really struggling hand to mouth. I mean, what are we going to do for the fact that children are going to be in a really, really difficult position for the duration?
Again, Councillor, Councillor, these are sort of substantive proposals you're putting forward, which really should have been discussed previously. I'm not going to spend the time here in that part, as part of that negotiation. These are, I suppose, an attempt at further mitigation to assuage the community. These matters, and the reason why I've opened up our briefings to ward members like yourself and others, is that it's give you the opportunity to develop these ideas, both with the committee in advance and with the applicants and officers, so that we can have these ideas matured finally here at committee. But I'm not going to enter a negotiation at committee. I have to make that clear. So if those are your two key points, I've noted them, but I'm not going to take a proposal that they will form part of the committee's final deliberation.
Chair, sorry, that wasn't the only 2 points. I mean, there's the music venue and the use of the music venue by the public, and actually free use for schools and within X radius.
Again, have you mentioned this previously to the
I have spoken to the applicants in the past. I appreciate I can't talk to them today. There was lots of nods and things at the time. This is not a new conversation. Okay. And what I would say...
Forgive me for interrupting, Councillor. I need to make sure we do this. Again, because this is a benefit that you're asking the applicant to provide to the community, these are matters that should have been discussed in advance of this meeting, and therefore we would have a result of your negotiation on possible agreement with the applicant. What I'm not going to do right now is to ask the applicant, will you do the following to assuage the community? Because these are matters that should have been dealt with outside of this meeting. I'm happy to look at specific questions in regards to applications proper, technical details that you may wish for the committee to look at, but within the context of the council's policies, which is the guiding document for this committee. So unfortunately, I'm not going to pursue further if what you wish to bring to the table are methods to assuage the community. These are matters that should have been dealt with in advance of this meeting. Because this is not the place to do this. I'm sorry, it's not the place to do this. So I see Councillor O'Brien wishes to put a question, but before Councillor O'Brien comes into this, I did want to put a question back to Councillor Ali, just for clarity. You said that the ward councillors are opposing this application, and I'm conscious that we have one of your ward councillors or members of the committee. Can I ask you to clarify what you actually mean is yourself and Councillor Humber, of course?
I clarify that it is myself and Councillor Humber.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, now I will, Councillor Adele Morris has got a question, I believe. And this will be the final question to Councillor Omariani. Go ahead, Councillor Morris. You're on silence. Welcome.
Yes, so I just wanted to ask, in the report, which I appreciate you may not have in front of you, there's a bit on page 157, and it talks about Mellier Street. It talks about it's paragraph 110, and it talks about having entrance lobbies and a cafe onto Mellier Street, and it talks about it, albeit will bring a distinct change to the character of this intimate backstreet space outside the Horseshoe Inn, which becomes widened at this point. I just wondered if you could tell me what your thoughts are about a cafe and entrance lobbies onto that space and the change of character, how that might impact on is that immediately behind residents? Have I got that right? Is that immediately behind residents?
So I'm trying to get my head around this a little bit, because the back of the pub it's still in front of 8 to 20 Snowsfields, and it is right there. And then if that opens out, it opens out further away from residents. But if it's opening onto Mellier Street, if we're talking about stuff that's opening onto Mellier Street on the other side, then that is right underneath the windows, and especially bedroom windows, of residents in 36 Snowsfields and 8 Mellier Street, and also 8 to 20 Snowsfields. So the noise, the antisocial behaviour, and everything that comes with that would be unacceptable.
All righty. All righty. If that's okay, Councillor Morris?
Yes, no, thank you.
Very good. In that case, I see no further members wish to ask a question. Thank you, Councillor Ali, for your presentation today to committee. Thank you very much. Now, then, if I can now return to committee members, we've had an enormous amount of information presented to us tonight. Are there any point of clarification for members? But in fact, before we do that, I have promised, unless there's a suggestion I should do otherwise, that each hour we'll take a 5-minute break, just to keep us going. So what I propose to do, just for 5 minutes, to take a further break. It's 7 minutes past 10, and therefore we'd reconvene at 12 minutes past 10. Please return in 5 minutes. Thank you.